This dog didn't just stop one bomb. He stopped a war from reaching a quiet town, and no one even knew his name. The sun had just begun to climb over the hills of Briar Ridge, casting golden light across the winding country roads. School buses rumbled to life across the county, picking up sleepy children with backpacks too big and dreams even bigger. It was the kind of peaceful morning that folks in town took for granted, where the worst thing anyone expected was a missed lunchbox or a spilled thermos of juice. Ronnie Hayes had driven that same school bus route for 17 years, and every morning felt like the last. The same gravel crunch under his tires, the same wave from old Mr. Dalton on his porch, the same line of kids waiting by the red mailbox near the willow tree. But this morning, something was different. Just as he crested the narrow bend near Hawthorne Creek, a blur of brown shot from the woods and planted itself in the middle of the road. Ronnie barely had time to curse before slamming the brakes. The tires screeched, the bus fishtailed slightly, and inside, the children screamed as backpacks flew from laps and heads bumped against windows. The vehicle groaned to a halt, just inches from the dog now standing like a stone statue in the dirt road. He sat there, heart pounding, hands gripping the wheel, staring at the animal. It wasn't a coyote or a deer like he first thought. It was a dog, big and lean, ribs showing through a scrappy coat. Mud clung to its legs, and its ears were torn at the edges like it had survived more than one fight. But it didn't look afraid. It looked focused. "What in the—" Ronnie muttered, climbing down from the cab, boots crunching on gravel. The dog didn't run. Instead, it lowered itself slightly, growling, not at Ronnie, but at the bus. Its eyes, dark and sharp, were locked beneath the vehicle, as if it saw something no one else could. "Get out of the way," Ronnie called. But the dog didn't budge. It shifted forward a few inches and let out a low, guttural bark, not aggressive, urgent. Inside the bus, children peered out the windows, faces pressed against the glass. One little boy whispered, "Why's he growling at the bus?" Ronnie took a few steps closer and crouched. That's when he heard it. Faint at first. A soft, rapid ticking, like a clock buried deep in metal. He blinked, heart suddenly hammering in his chest. He bent lower, squinting into the shadows beneath the bus. There, strapped tightly to the chassis just above the fuel tank, was a metal box, wires coiled like snakes. A red LED blinked steadily, each flash a warning. Ronnie stumbled back, his voice cracking as he shouted to the kids, "Out! Everybody out! Now!" The kids didn't hesitate. They rushed toward the emergency exit as Ronnie yanked open the side doors, helping them down one by one. The dog stood guard the whole time, growling low, tail stiff, not moving an inch from his spot. Within minutes, sirens echoed down the road. First a sheriff's cruiser, then two more, and finally a black SUV with federal plates. Agents swarmed the bus while the kids huddled in blankets on the side of the road, but everyone kept glancing back at the dog, still silent, still staring, still waiting. And in that moment, even the most skeptical adult couldn't deny the truth. That dog had saved them all, too. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the quiet road in pulsing color as more vehicles arrived, kicking up dust and gravel. A perimeter was set, yellow tape stretched between fence posts and tree trunks. The old school bus sat silent, its engine still ticking as it cooled, but no one dared come near it. Not yet, not with what was underneath. Sheriff Darrell Boone stepped out of his cruiser, adjusting his belt with a grim look on his weathered face. He'd seen a lot in his 30 years, but never this. Never a bomb strapped beneath a school bus full of children. "Get the squad in here," he said into the radio, already walking toward the scene. A deputy met him halfway and pointed to the underside of the bus. "It's bad, Sheriff. Real bad. Homemade device. Looks like some kind of remote trigger. Maybe motion sensitive. They think it would have gone off the second that bus hit the next bend." He swallowed hard. Would have been a fireball. No survivors. Boone looked past him at the dog lying in the dirt near the front tires. He wasn't barking anymore, just lying there, head up, ears twitching, watching the scene unfold like he understood it all. He was filthy, his side rising and falling in slow, steady breaths, but he hadn't moved an inch since the bus stopped. The bomb techs worked fast, suited in heavy gear, crawling beneath the bus with careful hands and tense shoulders. One of them called out, "It's strapped to the main fuel line, wired tight, probably military training." Whoever did this knew what they were doing. The sheriff knelt beside the dog, close but not too close. The animal didn't growl, didn't flinch, just turned its eyes toward him. Deep eyes, dark brown and tired. Boone had seen that look before, on the faces of old veterans who had seen too much, carried too much, and still stood guard because no one else would. "You the reason those kids are still breathing?" Boone asked, softly. The dog didn't answer, of course, but his ears twitched and his gaze shifted back toward the bus. Nearby, the children were gathered under a shade tree with blankets wrapped around their shoulders, sipping from water bottles and trying to understand what had just happened. Some were still crying, others were just staring. A few pointed toward the dog. "He stopped the bus," one girl said. "He made Mr. Hayes stop. He saved us." Another whispered, "That mutt saved all of us." Boone stood, turning toward his deputies. "Get animal control out here, and not just to take him in. I want him safe, fed, looked after." The bomb techs finally emerged, faces pale, suits smudged with grease. One of them gave Boone a stiff nod. "Disarmed. We got lucky." Boone shook his head slowly, eyes drifting back to the dog who had risked it all to lie down in the path of a moving bus. "Wasn't luck," he said. "It was him." 3. The dog didn't resist when the deputy slipped a leash over his neck. He didn't growl or struggle, just stood and followed, slow and steady, like he'd been through worse and knew the drill. His legs were stiff, one paw slightly swollen, and his ribs showed through his mud-crusted coat. But there was something else beneath the grime, something solid and calm, like a soldier who'd been on the job too long. They brought him to the Briar Ridge animal shelter just past noon. The place was small, run down, but the people inside cared more than most. When the door opened, a bell chimed, and a woman in scrubs stepped out from the back, wiping her hands on a towel. "Got a stray," the deputy said. "You might have seen him on the news soon enough." The woman took one look at the dog and stopped moving. "This is the one from the bus?" He nodded. "No chip, no tag. But he's something else." She crouched slowly, palm open, voice soft. "Hey there, boy. You got a name?" The dog blinked at her, tail unmoving. He didn't flinch, didn't wag. He just stood there, letting her look him over like he'd done this before. Maybe too many times. They scanned him twice, then again for good measure. Nothing. Not even a trace of old registration. No owners came forward. No one filed a missing report. As far as the records showed, the dog had never existed at all. They kept him in a corner run, away from the louder dogs. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just lay there quietly, eyes tracking every sound, every person, every shadow that passed by his gate. He didn't eat much the first night, didn't sleep much either. But when a volunteer dropped her keys near his cage, he didn't startle. Instead, he stood, nudged them toward her through the bars, then sat back down like nothing had happened. That was the moment they named him. "Shadow," the woman in scrubs whispered. "You move like one. Quiet, careful, but always there." The end time 17, the name stuck. By the next day, the whole town had heard the story. Local news ran with the headline, "Stray dog stops, school bus bombing." Photos of the scruffy shepherd mix lying in front of the tires spread across social media. People dropped off blankets, food, toys. Letters came in, some from children who had been on that bus. "Thank you for saving my brother," one read in shaky handwriting. "You're a hero." Still, no one came to claim him. Not a neighbor, Not a traveler, not a soldier. He belonged to no one. But to the people of Briar Ridge, Shadow was already theirs. Every evening, as the sun set behind the hills, he'd sit by the shelter's gate, staring out at the road like he was waiting. Not for someone to come for him, but for whatever was coming next. 4. The morning after the near tragedy, the quiet streets of Briar Ridge were anything but normal. News vans lined the edge of the school's parking lot, their long antennae rising like metal stalks into the sky. Parents clutched their children tighter. Teachers spoke in hushed voices. And somewhere beneath the fear, there was something else creeping in. Suspicion. By noon, 3 black SUVs with government plates rolled into town. Out stepped men in dark suits and women with windbreakers that read FBI across the back. They moved with purpose, speaking in clipped tones, already sorting files and phone logs, studying traffic patterns and satellite images. At the head of the team was Special Agent Marla Quinn. She wasn't tall, but she moved like someone who'd kicked down more than a few doors in her time. Hair tied back, eyes sharp behind narrow glasses, and a calm stillness that told everyone in the room she wasn't here to play politics. She'd handled bomb threats in cities twice this size, but something about this one felt wrong. Too clean, too calculated. And it was bothering her. She walked the perimeter of the bus site herself, crouching beside the spot where the explosive had been wired to the fuel line. The bomb techs gave her a breakdown. Military-grade components, tightly packed, rigged with a proximity trigger. The kind of thing you'd need real training to put together. Quinn nodded slowly, listening, but her eyes kept drifting to the photos pinned up on the temporary board, the ones of the dog, frozen in the moment he stood his ground. The bus driver said the dog had sensed it before anyone else, that he'd growled and refused to move. She'd seen that kind of instinct before, not from pets, from working dogs, from animals trained for war. She turned to the local sheriff, Darrell Boone, who was flipping through a list of people with demolition experience in the area. "This bus route," she asked, "how long has it been active?" Boone looked up. "They changed it last week. Some kind of road construction on the old path." "Why?" Quinn's eyes narrowed. "So? It wasn't a predictable route." "No," he said, brow furrowing. "It was posted late Friday." "Why?" She looked back at the photos. "Because that means whoever planted this bomb knew ahead of time. And they didn't just take a lucky guess. They knew the exact turn, the terrain, the layout of the road." "You're saying someone inside?" "I'm saying someone with access," she said, voice low. "Someone with the kind of clearance that doesn't raise red flags. And if I'm right, this wasn't meant to scare anyone." "Want any search?" Boone shifted uneasily. "It was meant to kill." Quinn didn't answer. She didn't have to. Later that evening, she stopped by the shelter. She didn't say why, just asked to see the dog. Shadow was resting on an old blanket, eyes half closed, but when she entered, his head lifted. She watched him for a long moment before crouching. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" she whispered. He didn't move, didn't growl, just stared at her with eyes that didn't belong to a stray, but something older, trained, and haunted. She stood and made a call. "Run his prints," she said. "He's not just a stray, and I don't think this was his first war." 5. The shelter bell chimed as the door opened, letting in the scent of rain and the sound of worn boots on tile. Hank Doyle stepped inside, his hat clutched in one hand, his gaze sweeping the quiet rows of kennels. He looked out of place, broad-shouldered, beard graying, posture still straight like he hadn't yet let go of the military, even though his uniform had been packed away years ago. He nodded at the woman behind the front desk, who smiled politely but looked tired. "You here for the hero dog?" she asked. "Maybe," Hank said. "He the one from the school bus?" She led him through the back hallway to a kennel near the corner. Inside, lying calmly on a folded wool blanket, was the same dog from the photos on the news. His ears perked slightly when Hank stepped into view, but he didn't bark. He just watched, still and quiet. The woman started to speak, but Hank raised a hand. He stepped closer, kneeling slowly in front of the bars, staring at the dog with a strange mix of hope and disbelief. "Coda," he said gently. At the sound of the name, the dog's head tilted, just slightly. Hank leaned in closer. "Coda, buddy? Is that really you?" The shelter worker's eyes widened. "You know him?" Hank didn't take his eyes off the dog. "I think so. I served with a handler named Mills, Carter Mills. Best guy I ever knew. And his dog, that was Coda." He took a breath, voice low. "We were stationed outside Kandahar. Coda saved lives, found explosives before our boots hit the ground. He was fearless, loyal to the bone." The woman stepped back a little, watching Hank's face soften with something that looked like grief. "There was a raid," Hank said quietly. "Went sideways. Ambush hit us hard. Carter didn't make it. We thought Coda died in the blast. Searched for days. Nothing." The dog inside the kennel stood slowly, walking to the bars. His nose touched the metal just inches from Hank's hand. "But now you're here," Hank whispered. "Somehow, you found your way back." The shelter worker's voice was soft now. He had no chip, no collar, nothing. Hank nodded slowly. He wouldn't. Coda was special forces. Half the time he went where humans couldn't. And when Carter died, he must have, I don't know, run, survived, followed instinct. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't blink them away. And now he's back. And he saved those kids. The woman looked between them, her throat tightening. "We called him Shadow," she said. Hank smiled a little, eyes never leaving the dog. "Good name. He always worked in the shadows, always watching, always waiting." Coda, or Shadow, let out a low, soft sound, something between a sigh and a whine. He didn't look lost anymore. He looked like someone who had finally been seen. And in that moment, Hank knew. The war hadn't broken him. The loss hadn't stopped him. Somehow, Coda had come home. And even after all that time, he was still saving lives. 6. The school gym was turned into a quiet interview center. Rows of folding chairs arranged beneath the faded scoreboard and championship banners. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed over the hushed voices of FBI agents and counselors. Children sat with parents, hands wrapped around juice boxes and crayons, trying to feel normal again. But the adults knew better. There was nothing normal about what had happened. Special Agent Marla Quinn walked softly from table to table, listening, watching. Her notepad stayed tucked in her pocket. She didn't want to scare them, didn't want this to feel like an interrogation. The children had already been through enough, but she needed answers. Most of the kids said the same things. The dog jumped in front of the bus. He barked, he growled. He didn't let the driver pass. They didn't know about the bomb, not really. Just that something awful almost happened, and that the dog had stopped it. Then one little girl changed everything. Her name was Ellie Moore, 7 years old, freckles on her nose and pigtails tight enough to pull her eyes up at the corners. She sat next to her mother, feet swinging over the edge of the chair, holding a worn-out sketchbook in her lap. "He wasn't just there that day," she said. Quinn leaned forward. "What do you mean, Ellie?" "I saw him before. Lots of times. By the mailbox near our stop. He never barked or came close. Just sat there, like a statue." Quinn frowned. "For how long?" "Maybe 3 weeks," Ellie said, tapping her crayon against the paper. "He'd come early, before the bus, then leave after we drove off. Sometimes, he looked at us, but mostly," she paused, "he looked at the wheels." "The wheels?" Quinn repeated. "Yeah," Ellie said, shrugging. "The tires, always staring at them like he was waiting for something bad to happen." Across the gym, another child, a boy named Caleb, overheard and chimed in. "I saw him too. He was always on the hill near the fence, just watching. My brother thought he was someone's pet, but I said he was guarding us." Ellie nodded seriously. "He wasn't just a dog, he was working." Quinn felt her stomach turn. The pieces started clicking into place. Shadow, or Coda, hadn't wandered into that road by chance. He'd been tracking something, watching, waiting, and when the time came, he'd done what he was trained to do. He had saved them, but not just in a single heroic moment. He'd been guarding them long before anyone even knew they needed protection. She walked out of the gym and into the chilly afternoon air, her thoughts racing. This wasn't just a bombing attempt. This was targeted, timed, and deliberate. And the only reason those kids were alive was because an old war dog with scars on his body and sorrow in his eyes had never stopped serving. Quinn looked down the hill toward the shelter, where Coda waited behind chain link and concrete, and whispered to herself, "You saw it coming before any of us did, didn't you?" The wind didn't answer, but she didn't need it to. Some heroes don't need words. They just watch, wait, and act when it matters most. 7. It had been 4 days since the school bus incident, and Briar Ridge was still holding its breath. Parents drove their children to school instead of letting them ride the bus. Neighbors double-checked locks and lights, and even the usual morning chatter at the diner had turned quiet. The whole town was waiting for something. No one said it out loud, but they all felt it. This wasn't over. Shadow had been allowed out of the shelter yard for the first time that morning. Hank Doyle stood nearby, leash slack in his hand, letting the dog move at his own pace. Agent Quinn had arranged it after reviewing security footage again and again. The way Shadow reacted, the way he seemed to know where danger was. He wasn't just wandering, he was searching. The morning sun was barely over the ridge when Shadow stopped cold near the slope behind the water tower. His ears pricked forward, his body stiffened. Then, without warning, he lunged toward the fenced area, barking sharply, digging at the gravel and weeds near one of the metal supports. Hank shouted for help as Shadow barked louder, spinning and circling, hackles up. Quinn and 2 officers arrived within minutes. One of them raised his radio, calling for the bomb squad before they'd even opened the gate. Quinn stepped in, crouching beside Shadow as he backed away, panting, watching her with those deep, haunted eyes. "What is it, boy?" she murmured. The techs arrived fast. Their equipment beeped and buzzed, and soon one of them was crawling under the tower's grated platform. He froze, then slowly backed out. "It's another one," he said grimly. "Bigger this time, wired tight. Pressure trigger. Probably remote capable. This thing could have taken out half the block." Everyone stood in stunned silence. A second attempt. A worse one. Quinn turned toward the water tower. It stood tall over the town, next to the elementary school, a daycare, and the small clinic that served the county. If it had gone off, dozens more would have died. And once again, it had been the dog who found it first. She looked at Hank. He wasn't just lucky the first time. Hank nodded, eyes hard. "No, ma'am. He's doing what he was trained to do." Quinn's voice dropped. "Someone is targeting Briar Ridge, and they're getting bolder." Later that day, the tower was cordoned off, the device carefully disarmed and removed. Engineers came in to check the structure. Officers were posted at every major utility in town. But even with precautions in place, the fear was growing. Quinn stood beside the dog as he watched the horizon, muscles tense, nose twitching. "How do you know?" she whispered. "How do you always know?" Shadow didn't answer. He just kept looking, eyes locked on the far edge of town like he already knew where to go next, like he'd been down this road before. And in that still moment, Quinn understood the truth she hadn't been ready to say out loud. Whatever was coming, Shadow had seen it before, and he wasn't going to stop until it was over. 8. The sun was just beginning to set over Briar Ridge when Hank Doyle pulled up a metal chair beside Shadow's kennel. He sat quietly for a while, hands clasped, eyes distant, the orange light catching the edges of his weathered face. Shadow lay inside, head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded, but still alert. The dog barely moved, but Hank could feel him listening. He hadn't planned to talk. Not really. But there was something about the way Shadow kept watch even in rest that pulled words out of him. The same way he had seen soldiers hold themselves together long after the battle was over. "You saved those kids," Hank murmured. "Saved this town. Twice now." Shadow didn't stir. "You were always like that," Hank continued. "Even when the rest of us were falling apart, you stayed sharp, focused, like the bullets didn't matter, like the noise couldn't touch you." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "It was the summer of 2011, Kandahar province. You remember that?" "I do. Like it was yesterday. The heat, the sand, the way the wind could cut through even your boots. Carter used to joke that the dust would follow us home." Shadow's ear twitched. "Carter Mills," Hank said softly. "Lieutenant. Good man. Honest. A bit too young for all the weight he carried. But he had heart. And he had you." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I remember that day. The convoy was hit. IED under the third vehicle. Fire, screams, chaos. You were the first one out of the wreckage. Didn't wait for a command, didn't need one. Just ran into the smoke. Pulled two guys from the back of the truck. Took a hit to the shoulder doing it. Still didn't stop." Hank's voice cracked. He looked down at his hands. "We lost Carter that day. 1 second he was right there beside me. The next, gone. Blown back by the second blast. I tried to reach him, but there was too much fire. Too much noise. You were howling, trying to dig through the wreckage, refusing to leave. We had to drag you away." He exhaled, long and shaky, "and then you vanished. Night fell, and you slipped away. We searched. God knows we searched. We thought maybe you went looking for Carter. Maybe you couldn't accept it either." Shadow finally lifted his head, his eyes meeting Hank's. Something deep and solemn passed between them. "I think you've been running this whole time," Hank whispered. "Not from something, toward it. Still trying to finish what you started. Still protecting people because it's all you know. You never stopped serving, did you?" The wind stirred the leaves outside, soft and slow. "You're still fighting a war no one sees," Hank said. Shadow didn't bark, didn't whine. He just laid his head back down, not in surrender, but in understanding. The way soldiers sometimes do when they hear a truth spoken out loud. And in that quiet evening light, man and dog sat together, bound not by words, but by the weight of what they had both lost and what they were still trying to protect. 9. Agent Marla Quinn sat in the cramped back office of the Briar Ridge Sheriff's Department, surrounded by stacks of paper and half-empty coffee cups. The overhead light flickered slightly, and the hum of the copier echoed through the hallway. She'd been digging through local records for hours, and her eyes burned from staring at faded ink and pixelated printouts. But something wasn't sitting right. It wasn't just that the town had been targeted. It was how precise the attacks had been. Every site had purpose. Every move had timing. The school bus, the water tower, and now a third site, the community food bank, where a suspicious device had been discovered just the night before. It had been hidden beneath a delivery dock, rigged to detonate with the next shipment. Another close call. Another tragedy avoided. Quinn leaned back in the creaky chair, rubbing her temples. Then she opened the file marked Town Grants and Partnerships. Inside was a list of local organizations that received funding or donations from bigger foundations. One name appeared 3 times, in connection with all 3 targets. The Briar Ridge Outreach Initiative. She flipped through the papers faster now, scanning each one. The initiative had a long history of supporting small-town infrastructure, ET providing transportation grants, helping fund water maintenance, donating food and supplies. It was a charity, at least on paper, and one that operated quietly in the background. But behind it, there were names, contractors, employees, layoffs, and one name stopped her cold. Grayson Barlow, former U.S. Army Ordnance Technician. Honorably discharged, worked for the initiative as a logistics manager for 3 years. Laid off 6 months ago due to budget restructuring. Quinn pulled his personnel file. No complaints on record, but the notes were vague, too vague. Then she checked the police records. 2 months ago, Barlow was questioned after a small fire broke out in the garage behind his rented property. No charges filed. No follow-up. But the responding officer noted tools, wiring, and chemical residue in the report. Materials consistent with bomb-making. Quinn's pulse picked up. She opened her laptop, ran a search through federal watch lists. Barlow's name wasn't flagged. Not yet. But he had the skills, the access, and the motive. She leaned over to the desk phone and dialed the sheriff. "Boone," his voice crackled on the other end. "I found our connection," Quinn said. "All 3 targets, the bus, the tower, and now the food bank, were tied to the same group, the Briar Ridge Outreach Initiative." Boone paused. "That charity? It's not about the organization," Quinn said. "It's about who they let in. Grayson Barlow. He worked for them, got laid off, and now he's vanished. Where is he now?" "That's the problem," she said. "No one knows." She hung up and looked out the window. Across the parking lot, Shadow sat beside Hank's truck, watching the street like he always did, calm, still, waiting. He hadn't stopped pacing since the 3rd device was found. Like he knew something was coming. Like he could feel it in the air. Quinn stared at him, the files clutched in her hand. "We're not done yet," she whispered. "Not even close." And somewhere out there, Grayson Barlow was preparing for something worse. Something final. And the only warning Briar Ridge might get was a scarred old dog who never stopped protecting the people he couldn't bear to lose. 10. The sun was shining brighter than it had in days, as if the sky itself wanted to pretend nothing was wrong. Children ran between booths lined with balloons and paper streamers. Parents sipped lemonade, and a brass band played near the gazebo in the center of Briar Ridge's town square. It was the kind of event the mayor loved. Cheerful, crowded, full of smiles for the camera. But underneath the surface, the air buzzed with tension. Agent Marla Quinn stood near the food stalls, sunglasses hiding her scanning eyes. Her earpiece crackled with quiet updates from agents posted at every corner. Rooftops, alleyways, electrical boxes, and their thing. Nothing had been left unchecked. But it was the crowd that worried her. There were too many people, too many places to hide, something small and deadly. She'd begged the mayor to cancel the event. She'd explained the threat, the connection, the danger. But he'd waved her off with a nervous smile. "If we cancel, we let fear win. Besides, we've got the FBI here. What could go wrong?" Quinn hadn't argued. Not out loud. Instead, she'd set the sting. Quiet agents hidden in plain sight. A mobile command unit a block away. Surveillance drones overhead. And in the middle of it all, sitting calmly beside Hank Doyle's boots, was the most important piece of the puzzle. Shadow. He wasn't wearing a vest. No leash. Just a plain collar, and a silent determination in his eyes. His body was tense. His ears moved constantly, tracking the sound of every laugh, every shuffle, every footstep that didn't belong. Hank stood quietly beside him, pretending to sip from a coffee cup, but his eyes were locked on the dog. He'd seen that stance before, overseas. It meant something was about to happen. Quinn's radio clicked. No movement yet. All clear from North Alley. Then another voice. Crowd density rising. Kids are gathering near the stage. And suddenly, Shadow moved. He didn't bark first. He bolted, a streak of muscle and purpose, cutting through the crowd like an arrow. People gasped, stepping aside, unsure what they'd just seen. Quinn spun, heart hammering, eyes tracking him as he ran straight for the main stage, where the mayor stood giving a speech into the tall black speakers. Shadow launched himself onto the steps, barking now. Deep, warning barks that turned heads across the square. He clawed at the base of the speaker stands, growling, digging at the ground, tail stiff, fur bristling. Children screamed. Parents grabbed their kids. Quinn ran full speed toward the stage, shouting, "Clear the square! Get everyone back!" Hank was right behind her. 2 agents dove under the stage with scanners. One shouted, "Device located! Under the main amplifier. It had been hidden beneath the electronics, wired to detonate when the system reached a certain volume. It would have taken out the entire front of the crowd, but Shadow had found it first. Again. He backed away slowly, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the device until the bomb techs arrived. Quinn crouched beside him, hand resting on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just kept watching. Because he knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. 11. The space beneath the stage was narrow and dark, cluttered with tangled cords and splintered wood. Officers crouched low, sweat pouring from their faces as the bomb technician barked orders. The flashing red light from the device cast an eerie glow, blinking faster with every second. The timer had started. 90 seconds. Then 80. Then 75. It was real, and it was ready to kill. Above, the town square had been emptied. Parents clutched crying children behind barricades. Sirens wailed in the distance. The once cheerful event had turned to chaos in a matter of minutes. The mayor was rushed out by agents, pale and shaking. Quinn stood at the edge of the stage, her heart pounding in her throat. "Tell me you can disarm it," she said into the radio. A voice cracked through, tight with fear. "The circuitry's shielded. It's rigged to fry if we try to cut the wrong wire. I need time. I need a clear view." Shadow stood near the opening, growling low, his body tight as a spring. Quinn turned and met his eyes. He was watching the space below the stage, ears twitching with every click of the countdown. "Shadow," she whispered, but he was already moving. Without waiting, without fear, the dog dove into the dark. His paws hit the ground hard, sending up dust and splinters. He crawled toward the blinking light, tail low, growling as he pushed past the officers trying to steady their hands. "Get him out of there!" one of them shouted, but no one moved. Shadow didn't listen. He got close to the bomb, sniffed, studied, then bared his teeth. 60 seconds. He opened his jaws and lunged for the wires. The bomb tech swore, "Don't." But Shadow was already working, tugging with sharp, careful jerks, using his teeth to pull apart layers of rubber and metal. He growled with each movement, body shaking from effort. 45 seconds. The red light blinked faster now, like a heartbeat spinning out of control. The officer closest to the device looked away, bracing for the end. Then came a spark, a pop, and silence. The light stopped blinking. The timer went dark. No explosion, no fire, no screams, just quiet. Shadow slumped back on his haunches, panting hard, body trembling. He laid down slowly, head resting on the dirt, tail giving a slow, weak thump against the ground. His eyes fluttered halfway closed, but he didn't move again. Quinn dropped to her knees at the edge of the stage, watching him, tears stinging her eyes. "He did it," someone whispered behind her. She nodded once, voice barely above breath. "He's not a stray," she said. "He's a soldier." The square was still. From behind the barricades, someone began to clap. Then another. Then more. Until the sound rolled through the town like thunder. But Shadow didn't care about the noise. He had done his job, and for the first time in years, he let himself rest. 12. The town square looked different that day. Not because the flags were hung, or because folding chairs had been lined in neat rows under the oak trees, but because there was a feeling in the air, something quiet and full, like the weight of gratitude and memory mixed into the breeze. Families filled the seats. Children clutched hand-drawn signs with words like, "Thank you, Shadow," and "Our hero." At the front stood a small platform, built just for the occasion, where the mayor now stood with a medal in one hand and a trembling voice in the other. "For service beyond comprehension," he said, voice thick with emotion. "For courage that saved lives not once, but 3 times, we honor a soldier who asked for nothing. Not a paycheck, not a rank, not even a name. But we gave him one. And today, we give him something more." Next to him, Shadow stood tall on all four paws, cleaned, brushed, wearing a simple leather collar and a custom tag that read Valor. His scars were still visible, but his eyes were softer now. He didn't seem to mind the crowd, didn't flinch at the applause, just sat patiently as the mayor pinned a gold medal onto a loop on his collar. It was the first time in the town's history that a Medal of Valor was given to a dog, and no one questioned it. Not after what he'd done. Behind the crowd, near the schoolyard fence, workers had unveiled the statue. Cast in bronze, it showed Shadow mid-step, head lifted, ears forward, alert, ready, alive. At the base, a plaque read, "He watched, he warned, he protected." Children approached the statue slowly, placing dog treats at its paws, some dropping tiny notes or flowers. One little boy leaned close and whispered, "Thank you for keeping my sister safe." Later, after the speeches had ended and the cameras had stopped flashing, Hank knelt beside Shadow and clipped on a new leash, soft, brown, stitched with the words, "Welcome home." "Let's go, old man," he said with a smile. "Time to take you home for good." The crowd stepped aside as they walked through, some clapping, some with tears in their eyes. Shadow didn't look back. He didn't need to. At Hank's house, the bed had already been set up. A soft cushion near the window, toys waiting in a basket, bowls filled with clean water and fresh food. But Shadow didn't go to them right away. Instead, that night, he curled up beside Hank's bed, his chin resting on the floor, eyes slowly closing as the quiet of the room settled in around him. He didn't stir at every creak. He didn't shift at every wind gust. For the first time in years, he slept. Not like a soldier on edge, but like a soul who had finally finished his watch. Because some dogs don't just survive. Some return with purpose. Some find their way back not to rest, but to protect what's left, to finish what others cannot, and then, when it's done, to finally lay down in peace. Shadow wasn't lost. He had simply been finding his way back to the fight. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you liked this story, show your support with a like. And join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.